Welcome to Gary Keep It Simple. Today we're looking at vinyl and some of the myths behind vinyl and how it compares to other components in your hi-fi system. And let's get stuck in a bit. The most important one I've put at the end. If you've got anything to contribute, please do feel welcome to put some comments down below. And if you want to have any questions answered, please put them down below. And if there's anything else controversial or not, just put it down below. Anyway, don't forget at the very end there's the most important one. Now, you're probably aware that I've been in the hi-fi and video industry for many years, many years. I started off in it in 1976, so what's that? It's a long time. And that's when I went to college, and that's when I learned about things. And there's a difference sometimes between theory and practice. But by and large, with electronics and with audio, most of it's been learned and has been taught. So we know what's sort of going on because we've been told, and we've been told accurately. But some things, because of the way stuff works, some things just don't quite fathom out. So here's a couple of things that you may or may not have thought about, and these are vinyl record myths I've changed my mind on. So here we go. First of all, isolation. Now what's isolation, you are? Well, if you've got a record player, you're probably aware the way it works is that the needle vibrates, and that is then fed through into the system and the sound comes out the other end. So obviously you don't want to have any stray vibration on your needle, because that will be translated straight through. And you can tell that because when you actually operate the record player, very often you can hear the tone arm mechanism being operated. You can hear the clunks and things through the speaker. They're normally muted a bit, but then they're still there. So you know full well there's going to be sound coming through. So what you do is you have to isolate the speakers and the turntables so that they don't interfere with each other. So what can you do and how should you do it? Well, a lot of people get really upset about this, and they insist that you've got to have the speakers pointed in certain directions, turntables got to be mounted on a rigid mount, and all this sort of thing. Well, there is a large amount of truth in that, because obviously you don't want to have the thing vibrated by your speakers. But what you've got to remember is that most turntables have been designed by people who know what they're doing, and they have rubber feet and they have springs and stuff. Now what that means is that you get isolation by virtue of the fact that the rubber feet and springs are set for certain frequencies. High frequencies aren't going to by and large get through. High frequencies haven't got very much power to them, but bass frequencies will try and get through. So you need to have feet that will absorb that. So the way they do that is they go for, on a good turntable, you have a heavy plinth and you have feet nicely sort of spongy and with spring and things, and it should work. Obviously it's a good idea to put it on a firm surface, but you can. I wouldn't recommend putting the speakers and the turntable on the same shelf. Can do if you really try. If you isolate the speakers as well by putting them on proper isolation feet, then you should be okay. But more importantly really than the actual vibration through the shelf is the sound vibration. It's not a good idea to point the speakers at the turntable. And that brings me on to the other part. There's been a big debate by people who debate these sort of things. Should you play with the lid up on the dust cover up, or should you play with the lid or the dust cover down? Now, from a purely simplistic point of view, if you have the dust cover down, then you're not going to be able to hear the scratching of the needle. So if you're playing the music quietly, I would always have the lid down, for the simple reason that it's going to stop you hearing that scratchy noise. It depends on your turntable or record player, but that can be quite loud. So, if you want quiet background music, play it with the lid down. If, on the other hand, you're going to be playing it loud, you're going to have to experiment, because if you put the lid up, there is a risk that you're going to deflect the sound, if you're playing it loud, onto the turntable, or that the actual lid is going to vibrate, and that's going to transfer through its hinges to the turntable and make it pick up the sound. If you really turn it up loud, you will get feedback through through the pickup. So in my opinion, what you need to do is you need to actually experiment. If you shut the lid, you're keeping the sound directly off the tone arm and the cartridge. But if you shut the lid, you're making the lid into a thing that is more rigidly attached to the plinth of the turntable. So you could end up actually making it worse. Experimentation is the best thing. Don't go by a solid idea. Try it, see how you get on. And remember, it may be different when you've actually turned it up or down. Oh yeah, the cost of equipment. It's obvious that the more you pay for your equipment, the better the sound quality is going to be. Or is it? If you buy, I've been doing some research, and if you look on some of these marketplaces, you will see the same equipment, or what looks like the same equipment, and when they take it apart, it is the same equipment, and you could pay as little as £30 or as much as £100 for exactly the same item. And it doesn't stop within that price bracket. It depends who's selling it and how they're selling it. So I saw something the other day. It was a high quality, as it turns out, it was a microphone, and you could buy it brand new for as little as £68, or there was another site selling exactly the same microphone for £158. Now that, I think, is a little bit different. So obviously there are things that are going to make a difference, but when it's exactly the same thing, you have to, and then you think, well, hang on, what's badge engineering? If you buy a product from one company, you've seen it with video recorders and stuff like that. So you'd have a Ferguson video recorder in the UK, and you'd have a JVC video recorder, and you'd have a Philips video recorder, and it turned out they were all the same machine. The only difference was the label on the front. Well, that's one thing, but the other difference was the price. And so my advice as far as that is concerned is, do not assume that because you're paying more it's better. Make sure you use your ears. And remember, don't compare what you've got. If you go to a shop or something, don't compare what you're using at home to what you've got in the shop. If you're going if there are any shops around that still sell stuff, take your favourite version of what you've got to the shop and get them to connect it up, and the new one to connect that up, and hear the difference. You don't need to have the same piece of equipment, your speakers or whatever. You just need to have both pieces of equipment being run through the same system, so you can hear what your one sounds like and what the new one sounds like. And remember, just because it costs more doesn't mean that it's actually any better. You have to use your ears constructively. Right, the next one. Now this one's quite an interesting one, this. I've seen so many people, and they said CDs are inferior to vinyl. I would say, originally, I thought they were superior to vinyl. And then I've heard people telling me that I'm wrong. And I thought, well, I'm not wrong. So I've done some listening, and I've come up with this idea. Vinyl is very, very, very good. It's nice. It sounds nice, and it's what we've been brought up with. If you're a certain age, it's all you ever heard. For around 20 odd years, I only ever heard vinyl records or tapes. And the idea of CD, I mean, when CDs first came out, wow, they were mind-blowing. You had loud that were loud, and you had quiets that were quiet, and you had cymbals that were there, and you hadn't got distortion and all that sort of thing, and it was great. But then they started mucking about with them, and it wasn't the music, it was the way they mixed it that was the problem. If you listen to a CD, it will always sound exactly the same. That particular CD will always sound exactly the same in that particular unit. And that's the way it is. The thing about CDs is they can be really, really loud, and they can be really, really quiet, and you don't get the hiss you get with a record, or the scraping noise, or the pops. They have their own problems, but they don't have those particular ones. But they can be very, very loud. They will actually, if you can hear the hiss from a CD when it's on silent, when it's on loud, the loudest it can go, it will make your ears hurt. It is physically capable of making you go deaf. That's how big the sound spectrum is as far as loudness is concerned. They also have flat response, and they have extremely good separation. They are really wonderful, but the problem with that is they don't sound like records. They sound like CDs. Where they do have a bonus though is if you use a CD recorder, or digital recording, this is much the same thing, but if you have a CD recorder, you can record a record and it will replay that record absolutely perfectly. There is the problem that it will always play exactly the same. There will be no variation, there will be no wow and flutter, nothing will ever be different. That recording will be effectively set in stone, it's actually set in plastic. But once it's been done, it's been done, and it will record all the distortion that vinyl produces and all the mellow tones, and it will replay them like that. So there's no problem. But they are not the same as vinyl records. And the thing about vinyl records is every time you play it, it will be ever so slightly different, because the wow and the flutter and the cracks and the pops and everything else will always be ever so slightly different. So they will always have a more homely, more rounded sound than CDs. Cassettes. Now, cassettes are an interesting thing here, because why would anybody want to use a cassette? I mean, it's a stringy thing, you can get chewed up, but that's assuming that you're playing it on a shoebox recorder and you're a kid and you've got your sticky fingers all over it. If you play it on a proper cassette deck, a cassette, even a Type 1 cassette, but we'll go for a Type 2, you can get frequency responses well in excess of 17,000 Hertz. You can get signal noise ratio, which is better than vinyl. You've got separation, which is better than vinyl. And so actually, in its heyday, most people used to buy a record and they would then copy it to cassette, and they would then play the cassette. Now, obviously, it was easier to play cassettes in cars, but they also play them around the house, which is why they bought decent cassette decks. So a lot of people used to literally buy a record, record it, put it away, keep it safe, and then listen to the tapes. And if you had a problem with the tape, you could always make a new one. It was simple.
With Scotch's lifetime guarantee. Re-record, not fade away.
If it's Scotch, it's guaranteed for life.
Simple as that. Or you could give them to your friends. That wasn't quite so good. The record companies weren't so happy about that, but you could do it. Obviously, there was also the other things, bonuses. You could record other stuff. You could record the family. You could record stuff off the radio and all that sort of thing. But they were good and they were convenient. Now, those are the things that made it useful. And the records was the only good source that we had in those days to be able to record good cassettes. So they actually went hand in hand. Most people who had a good record player had a good cassette recorder. And so, don't dismiss cassettes. If you see these people saying about them being tangled up and stuff, yeah, that happens, but that's because you've got to look after the cassette deck. You've got to make sure you keep the pinch rollers and things clean, and you've got to make sure you don't put your... I had somebody once put, it was a videotape, they put it in a puddle of orange juice, then wondered why it didn't play properly. Similar things have happened, people have spilled beer over tapes and things, and then they don't work. But then, let's face it, if you were to drop something over your record, you're going to mess it up, If you look after them, they're fine. So cassettes are good. Again, they're analog, so they're going to sound good. And they're as good, at least as good as a record, when they're being done properly. Let's go on to the next one then. We're on number 5. This one is really the one that is most important. Tone controls. For some reason, audiophiles and hi-fi enthusiasts got stuck in the idea that you shouldn't have and don't want to have and can't use tone controls. Well, we've sort of covered that a bit with the fact that good equipment doesn't have to be expensive. But let's look at this from a sensible point of view. You want a flat signal going into your amplifier, and then you're going to turn it on and drive the speakers. So you need, obviously the most important part of your sound system has to be the speakers, because if the speakers don't sound nice, you're not going to get proper sound out of them. So you've got your flat response going in and all the rest of it. But how do you make up for the fact that when a speaker is being driven quietly, it isn't going to be reacting the same as when it's being driven hard? I mean, they're not linear. So normally when you set a system playing quietly, it's going to sound a bit mellow, and because the speakers are hardly going to be moving, and the air doesn't behave the same. If you hit something hard, it moves in a different way to if you hit it gently. And what we're doing when we've got it quiet is we're hitting it gently. So if you turn the system up, it will become alive, and so then you'll start to hear the sounds much nicer than they were before. Then you turn it a bit higher, and then with a bit more volume, and then it'll start to really thump in. The bass will start thumping, and the highs will be nice and sharp. Then you turn it up higher, and now the bass is actually hurting, and the sounds from the treble and all that are so hard, they're actually making your ears hurt. And you're not actually hearing the mid-range. You've lost the vocals, you've lost the delicate sounds because the bass and the treble are really thumping. So how do you get around this problem? Well, what you do is you turn the treble down when you turn the bass down when it's really loud. But when you're playing it quiet, you need to turn the bass and the treble up. Now, some amplifiers and systems do have built-in loudness controls, and that's what they're for. They actually give you a bit of bass and a bit of treble boost when it's quiet, and then they turn it down as you go louder, so you just turn the volume up. But if you haven't got that, you need proper tone controls, and you need to adjust them, and that's what they're for. Because there are two problems here. You've got physics and biology. Physics means that the speakers will behave differently at different drive levels, and biology means that your ears will also listen and hear stuff differently at different sound levels. This is part of the thing. When you were out hunting as a primitive person, you'd be listening for the prey, and so quietly your ears would be a certain sort of sensitivity. Then when there was loud noises and things, rocks, you'd run away and you'd hear that danger sounds from distance. So your ears would be physically hearing them differently. So what you need to do is you need to adjust your tone controls, bass, treble, mid, as appropriate to the level that you're playing it at. The only time you could get away with a flat input and flat speakers if you heard everything exactly as you wanted it to be, and you put it into the room they're going to be played for, and you set it up, and you literally had them bringing in different speakers to see what your room sounded like. And when you stopped, you'd hear what you wanted to hear, but that wouldn't necessarily sound nice to me, or to your wife, or your husband, or your children. Everybody hears everything different. Because they are your own ears, everybody hears absolutely everything totally uniquely. And what we have to do is we have to compromise and agree on things. But I can't hear what you're hearing, you can't hear what I'm hearing. But what we can do is we can agree that what we like is what we're hearing. So, tone controls, most important. And unfortunately, I wish more people would learn how to use them. Have you ever been to a disco and it starts off nice, but as the night goes on, they turn the volume up, they don't alter the tone controls. And what it means is you end up with ears that just don't sound right. They start bleeding and they start ringing and you have to leave. Well, that's what happened to me anyway. So there we have it. 5 myths that should be at least taken into account when you're doing your vinyl or any other hi-fi. Really value your input. If you agree with me, then fine. If you don't agree with me, then let me know in the comments down below. And any experiences you've got, please pass it on, and we can try and get some proper dialogue going on this one. And if you found any value of this, please like and subscribe, and we'll catch you another time. Cheers.